we're back with another episode with keeping up with the rookies, Tom and Roland, two doctors, two very good mates, two gun age group triathletes turned pro this year in their first year on the triathlon circuit, racing as pros, debuting in their first season, and it's been one to remember. We've just loved documenting this journey of Tom and Roland and exploring the highs and lows of their first season, entering some pro races. And if you recall from last episode, we were basically midwinter where Tom was flying through some winter training and feeling really good. And Roland had just come off his debut Ironman in Cairns, where it was an absolute battle and didn't go to plan. And Roland was really honest and vulnerable on his podcast about how that went. And that was such a great episode to listen to. And that's been the journey this whole year, which has been so good for this series of the boys, just really opening up and giving athletes an insight into their mindset and the challenges and the triumphs, which there'll be many more to come. So, Tom and Roland, thank you very much for joining us again.
Thanks, Jordy. Good to be back.
Great to be back on.
So we'll pick up from where we left off because there's a really exciting race to talk about, which is Sunshine Coast, where Roland, you've come out and won the bike leg again and had an unbelievable performance. So that's what we're going to get to. But to get there, we have to look at the training. So Tom, take us through. You were flying midwinter. You went overseas to Europe for a little bit. Had a lot of fun training and cycling around Mallorca there and some of those really world-class venues. And then things started to go a little bit downhill on return from that trip.
Yeah. No, I thought I'd sort of planned things quite nicely. Had a really good sort of 3 months through winter, and banked a lot of good work. Just really pushing the endurance miles like we talked about on the last podcast. Jared and I had sort of made a bit of a plan to just get some good sort of miles in the bank over winter and keep the intensity in there, but look to push the endurance a little bit more. And then, it was sort of feeling like I needed a bit of a break, and it was well timed to have a couple of weeks away and enjoy a bit of time with Soph, my partner, and some family overseas as well. So I was really looking forward to that. Unfortunately, got sick right on the cusp of traveling away. Just the 2 weeks away never sort of seemed to really recover from the jet lag and the sickness, and then much the same coming back to Australia. So the sort of month after that, actually, I found quite tough to get back to any real decent training. And all of a sudden, the sort of 2-week freshen up break that I'd planned to have off the good winter block ended up being trying to just recover from being a little bit unwell and fighting a little bit of jet lag, as well as, burning the candle a bit at both ends, still trying to get some training in and traveling and enjoying that time away as well. So it made for a tricky, I guess, re-entry back into some proper training, and just didn't really feel like my body was responding as it sort of had been all winter, unfortunately. So I'm sure it was a whole number of all those factors playing into that. But it was a bit frustrating to come off a really good winter block and then, feel like I'd started slipping in the other direction as opposed to sort of trying to use that break as a chance to really freshen up and get ready to fire into sunny coast. But I guess that's a bit of a summary of how things sort of went a bit astray, I guess, as you're saying, Jordy. Yeah,
it's always challenging. We talk about it on this podcast a lot, how you've got to be grateful for the periods when they're going good, because you can just get taken away from you so quick, and when you're sick, it's just frustrating, and it's this classic balance of I want to keep training, I want to keep pushing through, but then sometimes that prolongs it. So what was your mindset when it was kind of unraveling a little bit and Sunny Coast was coming up? How are you feeling, and what was the conversations you were having with yourself and Gerard?
Yeah, well, I guess, the initial plan had been, to get back from a bit of a break and enjoying, other things in life as well. And get stuck into, I sort of still had 4 or 5 weeks that I was, keen to get stuck into some training. And Gerard and I obviously both knew and had sort of a bit of a chat that, I needed to get back into some work pretty quickly to, get back on track. And unfortunately, both of our desires, I guess, to try and get to the start line in as best shape possible and be ready for the race. In hindsight, we've probably discussed, we just drove things in the wrong direction in the end, unfortunately. And, I'd take responsibility for that. I was probably in a bit of denial and not telling Gerard how I was really feeling. But, after the first couple of weeks back, still trying to push the intensity and get the load in whilst I was really just not recovered from whatever it was that had thrown things around, sort of put me, backwards a little bit in the wrong direction again. So then we really had to just lighten the load up and try and let the body recover in the last couple of weeks before Sunny Coast without really doing too much over the top or trying to play catch up, and just see if I could, from that point on, give myself a chance to freshen up and just race with what I had, with some sort of, I guess, adjusted expectations, unfortunately. Still keeping an open mind, but appreciating that it can't always be, sunshine and rainbows and the perfect prep. And I was very aware that at that point, I'd had a pretty good run and pretty seamless race preps up till that point. So made me even more grateful for those. But that's just reality of the way things go, I guess, the ups and downs. And, it's not the end of the world. There's lots of other stuff going on that's more problematic than a bit of disrupted race prep. But it's certainly frustrating at the time when you feel like you've done a good bit of work, in the months prior for that, then to sort of unravel a little bit in that last month was a little bit frustrating. But I guess, as you're saying, the conversations with Gerard, the mindset was just to sort of recalibrate expectations and look to see what I could get out of the race. In the position that I was in at that time. Yeah.
I will say that, we talk about things can't go well all the time and you can't turn up to every race in peak form. And I think you went on a run of, 3, 4 or 5, 70.3 wins in a row where you were turning up and really outperforming yourself. And throwing back to the Worlds last year, we really use your example as, you had gastro that week, and the Worlds was just your big race. It was your chance to be, 70.3 World Age Group Champion for your category. It was almost derailing, and it was a bit of an unknown going into that, going far out. Like, how much is that going to affect you? Everyone's different. There's no rule book here. Sometimes athletes will turn up and just not have anything in the tank. You were able to turn up, and it was a lot more challenging than other races, but you still won. And so I think that might have played on your mind a little bit, that even though you had this sickness, you probably thought you could push through it a little bit and still get a good result. Would that be correct?
Yeah, for sure. And I guess, I wanted to at least give myself the opportunity and keep an open mind to see what might happen on the day. And, I guess, although it was, not as clean a preparation as in the past, things go wrong for people all the time in race preparations. And, been thinking about some of the more well-known triathletes in the world, like Sam Laidlow, and people who'd sort of, had these, disrupted training periods, but still been able to freshen up and put out really good performances on race day. So I thought, at the very least, I'd have a learning experience out there, which I certainly did. But I guess, trying to keep an open mind and still give myself the opportunity to perform, even though I'm, knowing that it might not have been perfect in terms of the lead up was, certainly something that was, I guess my focus leading into it.
And I'll flag now, you had to adjust expectations. You weren't going in with form, and you still pulled out a 1:16 run. So it's not like you were shabby by any means. But Dad, I want to throw to you and say, what was your thought process as the coach coming into this part?
Yeah, I'm totally on board with everything Tom said. It was unbelievably frustrating to have such a great preparation, and, pretty much hadn't really had a bad race since he won the world title. He hadn't had a bad race before then. I think the last person to beat him was actually Roland in Melbourne pretty much 2 years prior, I think. So it had been an incredible run of successful races by Tom. And, we've seen Inga Britson, we've seen so many examples of people who are seemingly invincible for a period of time, and then all of a sudden things don't go quite the way, whether it's injury or sickness, and people don't really account or value the impact that inconsistent training has on you. And, Tom's well documented that he travelled, travelling from Australia, for those people who are listening around the world, it is a huge trip. It's a 24 hours of actually travelling, if you're lucky. Because by the time you have stopovers, it ends up being a huge period where you're on a plane for a bloody long time, and that has an impact because you're breathing the same air. And there's so many examples that I've got now that people who have got COVID from being on a flight, whether it's a flight from Perth to Melbourne or whether it's a flight from Perth to London, people have come out of those flights sick. And, you only have to have a few people on the plane who are sick and the whole plane ends up being sick. And so there's so many things that can go wrong with the idea that Tom had was to have a break. His first year as a doctor, he's working really hard. He deserves this break. He's trained really hard. All of those things should work. But the minute you get sick, it changes everything. And then because we had a race so close to him coming back, the idea was that, yes, let's get over the sickness and then start to push some intensity. But we were too keen and we didn't really allow him to recover from the trip and the sickness. And possibly these are the mistakes you make when you're the motivated athlete. We talk about that a lot. I just want to get going. I just want to get back to the form that I was in. I'm in great form. I've been training the house down. And so it's easy in hindsight, but you have to learn from hindsight. You have to actually learn what went wrong. And, you saw Ingebrigtsen turn up to the World Athletics Championships and he's been injured and he's tried to train. He thinks he's in good form. He comes to the race and he doesn't even make the final of the 1500. When your form is bad, there's no miracle on race day that's going to happen. And that's a hard lesson, isn't it? Tom was just hoping like hell that something might change. And, I'm trying to say to him, well, it would be a miracle if you were able to ride the way you want, but it's not going to happen. You're going to be only able to ride at the form you've got right now. And that's exactly what he did. He actually raced to the form he had, and his numbers were down 10% on the bike, and he pretty much rode exactly to those numbers. So you can't create fictitious numbers just because you've done it before. And Tom's done it 15 times before in big races where he's been able to nail these numbers. So, Roland's experienced this the previous years. So it's the first time really Tom's had to go through this. And unfortunately, everybody's going to go through it at some point in their career. So you want to make sure that it's not the most important race that you're actually aiming for. If it was a world title or if it's for the bigger guys, it's the Olympics or things like that. You want to have some bad races where it's a little bit less significant impact on you. And I think it was good for Tom to go, and I actually was keen for Tom not to bother about the race because, he clearly was out of the form that was not going to be competitive. And we had a long discussion about that, and we both said, okay, if you're keen to do the race, you're going to get to travel from Melbourne into the Sunshine Coast. There's you've got this trip planned and there's a lot of mates racing. So it's a good thing to go to, and you can learn a lot of things about the way your performance is when you're not happy with it. So we always say, you're either winning or learning. So this is a great example of, lots of learning going on. So not trying to sugarcoat this. Tom was quite clear about where his performances were. All the numbers we were training to, he was absolutely struggling. And we've got such data to compare against. What could he do the previous 3 years? He was nowhere near that in that last 8 weeks. So the writing was on the wall, but we still wanted to have a crack at it. So I really admire Tom for putting himself out there, because he would have to answer a lot of questions afterwards when people would say the inevitable question, oh, what happened? And that's a tough question to ask someone when they haven't performed the way they want. And you've got to stand there and say either, things didn't go my way, or, the response you make is you want to tell the whole story, but you actually don't. You don't want to have to explain that to every single person who asks. In the end, you just end up saying, oh, I didn't go the way I want. And most people will be happy with that. But, the reality is, you just had the worst preparation, and, there was never going to go the way you wanted it to. So I think it was a hard lesson, but it's one that you'll look back on and say, well, in the future, if I know that my form's not there, then the choice is don't do the race or be okay with performing at your current form.
And Roland, you had to experience that at Cairns, where you had to feel like you potentially had to explain yourself to a lot of people, and everyone's going, well, what happened? And it's just such a frustrating thing sometimes to have to constantly re-explain and go, I went through this. And again, I'll say, you did such a good job on the podcast last time, just talking through how it unfolded, and it takes guts to do that. And so for you, you've had a pretty opposite experience to Tom. Everything went up from Cairns. And I want to give everyone some context. We spoke on the podcast last time in terms of their training, the volume that Roland was doing leading into that Ironman. Despite the race not going so well, Dad and I were talking about how that training block and the race itself really propelled you. And I want to get your thoughts, Roland, if you felt this way, really just propelled you for the next block of training. And we talk all the time about how athletes, as long as they don't completely overdo it, they'll do their A race and then they're flying 2 weeks after that, after they've had some recovery. They're really in good form. Is that how you felt after Cairns?
Yeah, absolutely. I did think that, I mean, Gerard and I had that conversation early on about Cairns and fitting that into, I guess, that semi-off season throughout the winter period. And I remember Gerard saying that, look, you've got two options. You can either do Cairns and, try and sneak in 3 or 4 weeks worth of Ironman training, which is obviously ambitious, having not really targeted that, or do the race, not do the race, but just, dedicate the winter to, really good, intense training over the winter, which I think was what Tom had, I guess, planned to do.
Yep.
And so, as you say, I think coming away from that experience, I hadn't maybe realised just how beneficial it was, doing those really key hard sessions for that Ironman. But afterwards, I think 2 weeks after, I was doing some of the best, running and power numbers on the bike that I'd seen for over a year or so. So, yeah, it had definitely helped, I think, that experience.
It's so interesting because you could easily throw in the towel a little bit and go, woe is me after that race. And look, it wasn't, it sounds like it was the worst thing in the world. It really wasn't. It's just just a bit of an off race. But, it's easy when we have an off race compared to our expectations, just go, throw in the towel a little bit or throw the baby out with the bathwater. But instead, you just put your head down and keep going. And then literally just 2 weeks later, you're absolutely flying. So,
absolutely. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think, I guess one of the main things and one of the reasons why I was so disappointed and embarrassed by that race is just because I knew that I was doing some quality sessions at work leading up into that race. And so it's just not what I had sort of expected of myself coming into the race. Whereas I guess for Tom, he's gone through this, tumultuous period where he's come back from overseas and gotten sick and had pretty much everything go wrong that could go wrong. And then he's not being able to do the sessions at the same intensity or, quality that he'd like to. So, I guess coming into the Sunny Coast race, he sort of knew that he wasn't going to be where he wanted to be at. So it's a bit more reassuring and his expectations are, in line with that, which is obviously not great because he's a phenomenal athlete and, when he's firing on all cylinders, he's a force to be reckoned with. So, I was kind of happy that I knew that he wasn't going to be showing up. Might have been able to toe the line a bit more easier with him. But, I think, those are just two comparisons about, tempering your expectations coming into a race like that and looking back at the training and what you've done.
I want to go through a little bit of the training and get some insight into some of those key sessions and numbers you were doing. That's what everyone would love to see, especially some of the monster wattage that you push out yourself. But let's go through the race. And you kind of get to race day. Tom, you're feeling a little bit undone, unsure how it's going to go. Roland, you're in pretty good form. You're pretty excited for your home race as well. Quite a fast race. So, we'll go through each leg and kind of give us your separate experiences. The swim, start with you, Tom. How did that pan out for you?
Yeah, I'd just like to quickly add, I guess, without playing compliment table tennis with Roland here, knowing that he sort of put him after a really good preparation and thought he was, he was absolutely flying going into Cairns, still being able to grit out, a full Ironman, gave me a little bit of inspiration to, even if it's not the best day, you can still get through a half and, keep your chin up and get through it. So that was definitely something that was in the back of my mind going into the race, and certainly during it as well. But getting into the swim, there's probably So my swimming's obviously not my strong point, and I have struggled quite a lot since Geelong, probably in the pool, and in the water as well. So I didn't have huge expectations about the swim, but I definitely knew that differently to Geelong, unfortunately we didn't get the swim in Port Mac. But differently to Geelong, there was probably going to be a little bit more of a spread throughout the field of swim abilities, a little bit less sharp towards the top end, and probably a few weaker swimmers as well that would be, you know, more around my capability. So, you know, with sort of adjusted expectations for the race in general, and knowing that, I guess I just looked to execute the best swim I could, try and stick with people around me as soon as possible, and then just look to swim solid, but not try and do anything fancy. I guess accepting where I was at that point, and just making the best of what I could. So ended up swimming with another guy, which was probably the best learning experience of the day, because I've never, you know, really swum sort of side by side or next to someone for a whole swim like that before. I guess in the age group field, there's people everywhere, and in Geelong, I was just on my own, like Roland ended up being as well. So that was certainly a really good learning experience, because I sort of shifted my focus to just trying to stay with this person and sort of didn't really think about too much else. Like I was just trying to sort of stay on their feet, stay on their hip, and we honestly ended up just like knocking into each other side by side for like 90% of the swim, and probably just slowing each other down and not actually using each other to advantage. But I guess that was a really useful learning point because it's not something I've been able to experience before. And I probably took for granted, you know, their sighting line as well, and just focused on my own breathing and trying to stay, you know, relaxed and conserve energy. But like a lot of the pro field ended up doing, I unfortunately took a quite large detour to a additional buoy that was on the course. So I'm not even sure what happened, but we swam, you know, 100, 150 meters too far, I think, compared to the actual course. So lots of good learning things. It was the tracker will have a pretty atrocious time, even for my own standards, unfortunately. But the pace from my watch was nothing to write home about, but actually not as disappointing as I could have anticipated going into the race. So it was sort of status quo, I'd say, in the end.
Ended up being about 134 pace, I think.
Like 133 or 134 on my watch, which is, you know, nowhere near what like I need to be swimming to sort of get in the mix in these races. But to be honest, given the way I'd been feeling in the water, not just the period, even like before I went away, unfortunately, I just hadn't been swimming super well in the lead up months. Felt like I'd been sliding back a little bit. So I probably would have almost taken that if you would have told me beforehand. Yeah.
I think it's interesting, Jordan and Tom and Roland, if we look at Tom's time from last year, you swam, I think it was 28:30, and you've swum 32:30 this time, so 4 minutes slower because you swam longer. There's no doubt about that. And when I looked at Roland's, it was 25, and Roland swam nearly 28:50, 29, 4 minutes slower. So you actually both swam similar in both years, and that's the thing that people stop getting right. They are comparing the swim and saying, "Oh, I'm 4 minutes slower. What's wrong with me?" Well, you actually swam way longer than you should have. And so, you've got to get the perspective right. You can't compare apples with oranges. So it's a good way to show people that, Roland was 4 minutes slower. So Tom, you were 4 minutes slower. So you actually didn't do anything different than you did the year before, to be fair. Because
Roland, would you count that as a good swim? You were 124 pace, but it was a slower overall time. How do you assess your swim?
I was quite disappointed with my swim, I guess, as well. I mean, I'm not an exceptional swimmer by any count, but I was sort of hoping to be further up in the field. But I remember being actually at the first start of the race, there's about 300 metres out to the first turn buoy, and it was just a massive washing machine, and I was right in the middle of it, getting whacked from all sides, and I actually got quite anxious in the middle there, and I had to stick my head up and just take a few breaths and sigh. And then I remember coming around that buoy and just seeing it split about 2 or 3 people ahead of me, and I'm just not quite the quality swimmer enough to come around and close that gap yet. And so I ended up being, I guess, in the pack that I didn't want to be in. And so I think, looking at the times from last year, obviously we had that deviation, and I ended up being maybe about a minute back from the pack that I wanted to be in. So again, by all counts, not a terrible swim, but also not quite where I wanted to be coming in the water.
It's such an interesting conversation point, and we said this at the very start of the year. And Dad, you said this right from the beginning. With this decision to turn pro and race in the pro field, you're suddenly not comparing apples with apples. You're comparing yourself against placings, which is a really difficult place to be because, by all means, with the times and the swim paces, it's definitely not bad at all. But that comment of, I was further back than I wanted to be, well, you can't control everyone else, but you'd still like to be in the pack. So it's a really hard balance to get right. And Dad, I'm curious to your thoughts on that, because of course you need to race the race and you want to be competitive, but triathlon's still an individual sport, so you can't go one way or the other too much.
Yeah, swim's a bit tough, really. I can be disappointed with my swim time, but you have to look at why is the swim time slower. And the conditions were way worse, and you swam further, and so we still want to use that as it's not a good swim because my time is slower, even though we know we're intelligent human beings. We can't compare that swim. Whereas the bike set and the run is relatively comparable. The wind would be the only factor. The course is exactly the same. There's nothing different on the course on the bike or the run, but the wind could be a factor. So at the end of the day, the swim is only going to be something that's really comparable if you've got exactly the same perfect conditions and they've got the marker buoys in the right spot and they've measured the course. So we can never really look too much into what the swim's doing. I think it's almost like we're doing our best just to conserve our fitness here and so that we can actually ride and run the way we want to. And I think that's the takeaway is don't get too caught up in times from previous years in the swim, because every year there's going to be a different setup of the course compared to the conditions.
Takes us to the bike leg, and I just want to take a second here to commend Roland and make sure the audience get a good grasp of this, because you've ridden a 1:58.10 once again for the second time already in your pro career, the fastest bike split of the day against absolutely world-class athletes. You are competing across 3 disciplines, of course, but in terms of the bike, these are the best triathletes in the world that you're now competing against, and you've for the second time given the fastest bike split. So firstly, I just want to give your props to you and say phenomenal effort, Roland. That is just unreal.
Oh, thanks, Jordy.
And I want to go through some of your numbers as well, because they're just so fun to look at, because we know that you're a big boy. And average power of 360 watts for the 1 hour 58, normalized power 367, best 20 minutes of 390 watts, average cadence of 91 for those interested about, you go to race cadence, average speed of 45.7. So absolutely flying there. But I'm really interested to hear, how the race panned out, because when we look at your first half and second half split breakdown, you were 368 average first lap, and this is when you're coming out of the water, you haven't got a pack, for 45.3 kilometers an average speed, so 368 watts for 45.3, and the second lap, you're 347 for 46.1, so 20 watts lower for faster speed. So talk to us about how the race played out, and you ended up being able to find a pack and then getting ahead of them. Like, how did that go?
It's interesting to hear those numbers, and thanks for the that's really nice of you to say all that stuff, Jordy, so I appreciate that. I didn't even know my cadence was 91. I actually would have thought it'd be a bit lower, to be honest, than the average, so that's interesting to hear. But coming out of the water, I was with a pack coming out of the water, but I just knew immediately that I didn't want to have any passengers really with me, so I managed to get out of T2 or T1, sorry, sort of first out of that pack, and just got to work straight away on the bike, trying to sort of minimise the gap up the road. But of course, with Gerard's voice in my head telling me not to go too far, don't go ballistic with it, which I probably didn't listen to be honest, at the time, but because there's quite a steep pinch coming out of town there. I think for the first out section of the course, I was predominantly by myself, and trying to hold around, I think 360 watts was what I was trying to hold for the whole day. So I was quite happy to, obviously go and do that for the race. And then I got caught up from 2 riders who had bridged up from behind me, and we started to work together coming back into town, which was also quite handily into the headwind. And so I tried to use that as much as I could to my advantage. So I started to work with these other guys as well and get a bit more of a rest whilst I was coming into that headwind section. And then so after the first half, we just tacked on to the main chase group that was there. So I think there was about 6 or 8 guys who were sort of in that main chase group, trying to get back onto the main front part of the field, which, as you said, did have some pretty, big names in the sport, like Braden Curry and, Jared Osborne and other guys who have, run some pretty big races out there. So that was always good. And that was also coming right back through town when we caught on to them, which is also where all the spectators are. So I had maybe a bit of extra motivation, when everyone's cheering on as well.
Yeah.
So at that point, decided to go quite hard on the bike and put in about a 5 or 10 minute surge through town, just to make sure that I wasn't again picking up any other passengers coming back into that really fast section going back. And I can't entirely explain why there's such a big deviation between the 2 laps, like you mentioned, Jordy, to be honest, because going back again out of town on that second lap, I was predominantly solo until I got caught again by Kieran Storch, who's, a phenomenally strong rider and runner as well. And so we started working together on the way back into town to finish off that second lap. But obviously, we were sharing turns on the way back, so I saved probably a bit of energy there and was able to sit in a bit. And then maybe the wind had picked up on the way out as well, which meant we might have had a bit of a stronger overall speed as well for, a lower effort, which is always beneficial coming back into the run where you want to save your legs a little bit. But I think, some of the real takeaways, I think, from the good training that we did leading into this race, it was doing a bit more over-under efforts, sort of simulating the experience that we were expecting coming into this sort of pro field and race. And so some of the key sessions we did was having a 5-minute hard section before a more sustained 30-minute piece, followed by another pick up in power, which I think was a really good simulator for what we saw on the day. So I think those sessions really helped out in that scenario. And there was a few other sessions that I think were really key in that, helping, hold really high sustained power, which were going and doing some, races mixed in with a long ride, on the weekends. Up here on the sunny coast, there's a few weekends where they do a few road races where we might ride out to the race and then do an hour or hour and a half at, quite a high threshold power, which again is a phenomenal way to go and train and get in some good quality work. And then again, the Zwift races that the Tripelo group do every Thursday night over winter are just possibly some of the best training I think, we do throughout the entire year.
Especially because we give you boys an impossible handicap where we just, unfortunately, we put you on the limit every Thursday and you stand up to the challenge remarkably. I don't know how you do it every time.
Well, I don't know. I just try to hold on to Tom's wheel the whole time as he pulls everyone around. It's ridiculous.
We struggled to make much inroads this year, unfortunately.
I am curious, how many age groupers were out in the course in the second lap, because sometimes that really does make a difference for drafting, even though
yeah, for sure.
We see this a lot, even though you're going past them, there's still just that wind and drafting effect, right?
Oh, of course. Yeah, it's such a good point. It's something I didn't even think about just then, but absolutely. And, there were quite a lot. And you can, I'm not sure if it's even legal, but of course I still did it. I'm sure everyone does. But, I'll into between where there's a gap, I will probably come in, try and make the most of that draft.
Yes.
And then come back out.
Yep. Spot on.
Sorry if it's not legal.
You're staying to the left. That sounds right. You keep it to the left right until you have to go around. Yeah.
That's a great.
Well, that is the rule, staying left, and then you should only be on the right when you pass. So so you're doing nothing illegal there, Roland.
Yeah.
I think that's definitely right, though, Jordy. Like, even prior to this year, it's more pronounced this year, well, for me anyway, because there's less people on the course to pass on the first lap. But yeah, like consistently on a lapped course, we'll have like lower power for better speed on the second lap. I think it's just that dirty air that you're going through.
Yeah, exactly right. This is such value of us, you being Travel athletes and we have all your data, we can really see the details of the lap. We always talk on this podcast about how we're reviewing the world champs. We just love to see their data and what was happening. And I would have been interested to see those guys that bridged to you on the first lap, what power they put down to bridge to you, because you're the fastest rider of the course. They must have had to really override there. And then your ability to surge through town to get away from them, that definitely would have cooked them if they were already on the limit. I would have loved to see their first half versus second half split based on what times they did. We don't know, but it would be cool to see that. I want to throw to the coach. What do you make of that performance and almost from as well a proud moment to see a 1:58.10 on the screen and once again the fastest split of the day? What do you think when you see that?
I just think it's all the hard work paying dividends, and all the sessions that Roland was mentioning, they were very specific that we wanted to change things up. We didn't want to ride threshold anymore. We wanted to ride variations in threshold because that's what the pro race is like. And so for all those age groupers out there, we're trying to replicate what your race is going to look like. And you're not a pro athlete like these guys, so you shouldn't be doing this. You shouldn't be doing a lot of work where you're trying to get yourself where threshold is not your goal. Threshold should be your goal. And that's the way Tom and Roland were as age groupers. They were on their own, not in a pack, not surging, and so they had to train that way. And now we've had to switch that. And in the last podcast, this is exactly what we said. What are we going to do about improving our bike? And we said we're going to change and make it more over-under riding. That is still good for age groupers, by the way, but it's not actually what we want them to do on race day. We want them to stay in the ranges that we give them. Whereas I'm saying to Roland and Tom, there's periods where you need to be well over to be in the race. You're actually trying to ride a time trial in amongst a race, whereas everybody else in the race who's not in a pro field should be just trying to time trial. And I know there's other athletes in the way, so that makes it very difficult because you end up in a pack sometimes. So it is hard, and then you sometimes end up with lower power with faster speed, like you would, as the guys have been speaking about. But for the guys who have actually busted their backside to get up to Roland, who'd got away from them early, that clearly showed because they dropped off badly. I looked at all those guys who did that because I was following the race intently, and Roland was able to actually maintain, basically improve his speed, whereas these guys were dropping off, and that's why Roland ended up with the fastest time. And so if your body's not used to riding a hard section, you're going to blow up. And so I think that was the beauty of what Roland was able to do. He trained that way, so his body was actually ready for it. And we both agreed that it was not going to make any difference to his run, whether he rode 10% harder or 5% harder or whatever. He's going to run reasonably similar. And all the sessions we did, the race ready sessions, all those numbers, he was doing those in training. So what we talked about Tom before, where his numbers were down, Tom replicated those numbers in the race, exactly the same numbers. And Roland, in training, he was flying. He was doing, what was that last 60 minute you did, Roland? I
think 390 or so. I think it was for me.
And so that equates to a 360 to 90%. And what was your speed? It was something like 47.
Yeah,
391 for 391 for 40. Oh, is that right? 44.7 it's got here. Is it? Seems low.
I think it was. It was a pretty windy day. I do remember.
Yeah, so
that.
different conditions. Yeah, but we'd had some other sessions where your speed was unbelievable for the power, and some of those days where you rode with other coach Matt Phillips, and you're doing some sessions together, and both of you were nudging 46 k's an hour for 75k in training. And so the writing's on the wall for a poor performance if you can't hit those numbers. The writing's on the wall for a fantastic performance if you're hitting these numbers. So the numbers don't lie. That's the beauty of it. You were going into this race super confident. Tom, on the other hand, is going into this race lacking confidence. And it's because he's nowhere near the form he's used to. And that's the lesson I want everybody to listen to in this podcast is you can only race to your current form. And I know we say that so often, but people don't really get that message through to their psyche of their mental preparation is, I can do this power and speed in my history, so I should be able to do that on race day, no matter what preparation I've had. And that's the thing that I think these two boys are getting good at. Tom raced really well to the form that he was in, and we need to not avoid that. That's actually a really good positive thing that Tom's done here. He's still ended up running his fastest half marathon, probably an angry half marathon. But Roland's come into this race with the best form of his career, and there's no doubt about that. And he's raced like that. He's done the swim was 4 minutes slower, but he's actually ridden. From last year, 2 minutes quicker and ran 5 minutes quicker. So he's actually 7 minutes quicker across the bike and the run, yet he's 4 minutes slower. So it only looks like he's improved by 5 minutes, but he's actually, if you take swim out, he's actually improved 11 minutes in 1 year. And I know you didn't have the best race at Sunny Coast the year before, but we can only compare those two races. So that's a phenomenal improvement in 1 year for a guy who's at the top of his range.
You're both as humble as they come for athletes, so it's hard to get you to gloat about yourselves. But Roland, you must finish that and just be stoked with the training and the execution.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't be happier, to be honest. To go out and do the fastest leg of a professional triathlon, it's always fantastic. As you say, we're not there to compare to other people, but it's always hard not to. And even comparing, as you say, Jared, this race to last year, I think we ended up placing better as age groupers as we have as racing in the pro field this year. It's just ridiculous. Yeah. But it just goes to show, I guess, the level that triathlon's going to, which is always a good thing. More competition is a good thing for the sport, so can't be too upset by that. I did have a thought that maybe I should just give up triathlon and just focus purely on cycling and go across to Europe and just be a domestique for someone over there, So.
El Tractor.
I'm sure there'll be a team out there that might take you. That's a good point. Tom, let's look at your numbers, because this is a super interesting part of the story, because by all means it's, the way we're talking, it sounds like the bike was a disaster, but the numbers don't show that. You've ridden 2:04.48, which is a phenomenal bike leg time. We know you can go quicker. It's not as quick as you wanted, so I'll get your comments on that in a second, but I want to run through the numbers. Average power 297. Same race last year, you were 20 watts higher, I think at 317. And you are trying to now hold more like 320 to 330 watts in races. For those interested in the cadence, your cadence on the race was 86, so a little bit lower than Roland's, for 43.3 kilometers an hour. So absolutely not a shabby ride, but some interesting points. So your heart rate was 157, and your heart rate is consistently, this is the average, consistently averages, I'm looking through all your races, 169, 174, 163, 167, 167, 167. So it's 10 beats lower. And so I wonder if, that's often, you guys are doctors, so you might be able to comment on this, but we often see that when athletes are sick, they can't get their heart rate up. It's like they can't get their engine going. But my whole point here is that you actually rode a 2:06 at Sunshine Coast last year. So in terms of conditions and trying to compare apples with apples, even though it was a worse day for you and your expectations, you've still ridden phenomenal, faster than last year, and some interesting numbers there. So what do you make of all that?
Yeah, I think that might have been the year before, Jordy. I'm pretty sure.
2023.
I think it was about 4 minutes slower than last year.
Yes, sorry, 2:06 2 years ago, 2 hours flat last year. So that's important to note. You rode 2 hours flat, which shows what you're capable of. So 4 minutes slower this year, which is, and as you're saying, it's sort of, as Jared was saying, the writing was sort of on the wall a bit beforehand. For whatever reason, I've just been really struggling on the bike more than anything else. I've been running okay in training and still been able to get some sessions done, but I'd probably only had like 2, maybe 3 sessions on the bike where I'd felt not like I was, going well, but sort of closer to, sessions that I'd be happy with. And I guess, as Jared's saying, there's no miracles, in your recent form's the best predictor of race day performance, which is extremely true. I guess I was just holding on to those, couple of little light at the end of the tunnel moments that I'd had, had a decent 75k time trial, some better power, and 1 or 2 other sessions where I felt, closer to, a range that I'd hoped to be able to execute. And I was sort of just blindly hoping that would happen on race day, but it was evident pretty quickly it wasn't going to be. It was a bit of
mental battle, to be honest, on the bike. I was, I always know I'm coming from behind after the swim, but I'm usually pumped to get on the bike and really ready to execute the best bike I can and get myself back into the race and, at least execute a ride that I'd be really, really pleased with. So it was pretty difficult going into, out of the swim, however far back, and then into the league that I was probably least confident with on the day, which was very foreign for me because I'm usually really looking forward to getting on the bike and getting to work, regardless of what's happened prior to that. So yeah, it was a very interesting experience. And, I have a lot of respect for, I'm fortunate that I've got some great equipment and a few years of consistent training under the belt that, can still ride 204 or whatever it was on the day when, not be suffering for as long as some others who are doing a really good race and just having to be out there pushing for a bit longer for where they're at. So, I was, aware that it was the time was still going to pass. Contemplated a few times of pulling the plug, but I was already that far in. I thought I may as well just get as much of a training day out of it as I could at that point. But yeah, it was definitely foreign, really struggling to hit even what I felt like was pretty conservative target around the, between 300 and 310 watt mark, which is something that I should, previously been able to do fairly comfortably. And even in my sort of race preparation sessions was, consistently still riding between that 300 and 310 watts, which was, not something that I was stoked about, but I'd sort of been able to fairly consistently replicate that sort of range. And to sort of struggle to get there on the day was, it was a bit of a mental battle. But the conversation I'd had with Gerard before was we're just going to have to see what the body does on the day, and whatever sensations you're getting and however it's responding, just had to try and make the best of that. So I think once I'd got around the first lap, and sort of committed to getting out on the highway again, it's sort of only one way home then to just keep going around. So yeah, just tried to make the best of it. I just accept where the numbers were out on the day. Had someone on the first lap that I was riding a little bit with, and frustrating, interesting experience, sort of getting dropped in the wheel like consistently every time they go to the front, and then struggling to get back around to take turns. But it certainly helped keep me in it a little bit mentally, and came a little bit better on the second lap. At least sensation wise, the power wasn't necessarily much better, or the speed, but I felt like I was able to sort of lock into a bit of a rhythm and just ride for where I was at on the day. But yeah, certainly interesting what with the heart rate, and I noticed that as well. I'm not sure what I haven't been through it like the second lap, but my heart rate might have been like 150 or something like that, which is pretty much like zone 2 sort of heart rate. And it's sort of for
that second half,
which like on a warmer endurance ride I might sort of be sitting up towards that by the end. So it was sort of consistent with what I've been experiencing in training and having those discussions with Gerard. And I really don't want this to be like a sob story. Stuff happens and it's just a race. But it was interesting in that, like, I'd felt like I could still get some run sessions done, which we'll get to in a bit, I guess. But I just really couldn't push on the bike. Like, and my heart rate would sort of consistently reflect that. Like, I did a 20-minute effort that I had to end up just cutting down to shorter pieces because I was pushing, 20, 30 watts below what I'd expect, but my heart rate was sort of appropriately reflecting that, sort of stuck around the 160s range when it's usually in the 180s for that sort of effort, but the effort felt really high. So the heart rate was actually appropriately low, I guess, for the power. I just felt, as you were describing, Jordy, a little bit sort of blunted at that top end and just couldn't really get the system going, despite, I guess, the RPE being quite high. For what the numbers were giving the feedback. And I guess that's where it's really useful for me, well, for any athlete, but I found it useful, having sort of a couple of metrics to use. As we know, sometimes power meters with, leaving them in transition or whatever, calibrating can, be reading a bit funky, but to see, I guess, that the power and the heart rate were appropriately, altered to what I'd hoped for and expected to be able to do. It was an interesting thing to reflect on, and not something to dwell on too much, I guess, going forward. But definitely just shows me that something was just not quite right and wasn't really able to ride as well as I would have hoped on the day. But we'll live to fight another one.
Yep, I think it's a really good summary, and look, again, you've been too kind. The impact of illness, you just can't underestimate. It doesn't seem like it has much impact on your training and your ability to push high intensity. But if you train when you're unwell, and that's kind of what we did, we didn't let you fully recover from that illness, and it almost blunts your ability to train hard. And so the lesson out there to everybody is when you're sick, this is one of the golden rules we have as in our Trivello family is, you can only train according to where you were at. If you're 7 out of 10 or 6 out of 10, you should only be training at 60, 70% of your FTP. If you're not quite 80 or 90% right, you shouldn't be training at 100 or 110% of your FTP. And so, the motivated athlete sees the race coming and wants to get going and doesn't really give their body the appropriate time to get back to full health, and that's just not what Tom's done. I've done that many times. Jordan, you've done it, and I know Roland, you've done it, where you're absolutely so keen. Look, I'm feeling better. I need to get on with my training. But you really don't. You really need to let your body actually. And when you've got a race coming up, that is the worst thing that can happen. You've only got X amount of days or weeks, and so you try and cram this program in. And halfway through that build, Tom and I decided, no, we're not going to try and push anymore. We're actually going to pull back because the temptation is to train harder. Try to train harder. When you're struggling for numbers that you can't achieve, you think, oh, I need to train harder. I'm not fit enough. Well, that's just not true. You had the best winter of your whole career, and I guarantee you, over this summer, you will reap the reward of that winter that you've prepared for. Those 3 or 4 months that you trained the house down. Except for you getting sick, you would have had one of the great races because you had done such good training. And this is a really good lesson. And we could play this recording back, and I mark my words, you will be performing the way you want to, because fitness doesn't disappear, your form does. That's what happens. When you're unwell, your form disappears because you can't get the body to perform the way it should because it's still fighting other things that are going on, like infection. So hard to hear that, and it feels like it's an excuse, but it's not, it's reality. And for you to dismiss that, I've done it myself. I've tried to go to a race where I had the flu. I'll be right. I've trained the house down, and I came nowhere. I think it was a Tour of Bright. I've told this story many times. I won the year before, and I came 23rd the next year because I had the flu that period. I was flying. I was in better form than I was when I won, but because I was sick, I expected that I'd be fine. And I just wasn't. I was so angry at myself for actually putting myself in the race and expecting that I would perform when I was unwell. And we just have to learn that lesson, unfortunately.
If I'm not mistaken, I think you said the same thing to Roland on the last podcast, that you will reap the rewards of that training, and he absolutely has. I think it's called Occam's razor. That this simplest explanation when solving a problem is often the correct one, and that you use interesting bit wording there, Tom, when you said, for whatever reason, the bike power wasn't there, and it's like, well, no, there's a very clear reason, and it's the trap we fall into all the time as athletes is can't figure out what's going on, especially when you're the one in it. And it's the most common thing we do as coaches is we remind the athlete, hey, it's not complicated. This very clear thing has happened, and that is the major reason that this is happening. Of course, all the time it's multifactorial, but I really like that. The simplest explanation is often the most accurate, and it was for you. You were sick and unwell, and you guys tried to train through it, and that was the period. And I'm sure there was other factors, but simplest explanation being the best. But we moved to the run, and Tom, you ran a 1:16 flat or 1:15:59? Is that correct?
Yeah, 59 if you're going on the tracker, Jordy, which I'm happy to take on that day.
Yes,
absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, and is that your fastest half in a race off the bike?
Yeah, I think it is, and it's honestly probably like the easiest. As in, I don't want to say that in the wrong way, but like from a perceived exertion point of view, was probably one of the easiest runs in a race I've done. Which I think just reflects the fact I wasn't able to ride as well as I would have hoped, and sort of with the reserves that my body had that I just wasn't able to access on the day. The legs were definitely too fresh on the run. I was pretty sort of low on motivation going into the run, but thought I'd just get going and, look to just jog the first 10K at, something that felt pretty comfortable. And the pace was just coming far too easy. The legs were a bit fresh. So, the plan was just to get around the first lap and feel pretty comfortable coming through halfway, which I did. And then, knowing that I was in a reasonable position in terms of executing a decent run, had enough incentive to sort of keep pushing on from there and get something out of the race in the end, which was good. And a couple of guys were sort of suffering just ahead of me on that last lap and could sort of use them as, carrots to chase down in the last sort of, 6-7 Ks, which was really good and definitely kept me mentally in it. I guess that was definitely a positive note to take out of the race, still being able to execute a decent run. But I guess it just for me highlighted, for the fact that I wasn't able to ride to the same, sort of intensity and effort that I usually do, and usually suffer a lot more on the run because of that. So it was really interesting actually to experience going into the run with the legs. And I guess, energy stores and everything being so much, such a better place versus having done a really hard 2 hours, whatever, on the bike and then trying to tackle the half marathon with depleted system already.
Was it an angry run, like Gerard said?
It actually was. To be honest, I'd sort of accepted my fate by that point. To be honest, I was pretty pumped seeing Roland right up there. I was getting around him as much as I could when we crossed paths, and seeing him mow down a few people was pretty motivating for me actually. And Matt Phillips out on course, I knew he was really up in the race, so I was actually just really sort of enjoying the. I'm usually suffering so much. I'm in my own head and just trying to get from K to K and get my nutrition in and get everything right. But I could sort of, still try and execute as good a run I could, but soak in a bit more of the atmosphere and the support out on course and everything, and try and get around the other athletes I knew there as well. So that was an enjoyable part of the day after the other 2 weeks.
I do find it hilarious that Tom can somehow manage to downplay his best ever run.
That's what I was about.
And it shows you the form that you had during the winter for your running, and had you been riding a lot harder than you would have, you would have run the same way. You would have had more incentive to run faster because you're in the race. Where here you're just relaxing. It does show you how well you can run when you actually relax rather than putting pressure on yourself. But you've got such good form, both on the bike and the run. But it's just not. We just didn't have enough time on the bike to get your form back. But when the running, it's a different activity, obviously. The bike riding, you're spending a lot of time on the bike trying to hold power, whereas as a runner, we're not doing a lot in terms of time to hold the same pace. So it just shows you the form you are in, but you didn't get an opportunity to show it. So it's, all the time I'm trying to make sure that everybody's hearing the true story here. So, so even though Tom will downplay it, and Roland downplays his extreme improvement as well. And you've got to celebrate these because that doesn't come all the time. And it's hard for Tom to celebrate anything there, but that is worth celebrating. It's something you should be proud of. That even though things were going completely the wrong way that you wanted them to go, you still came and pulled out the fastest half marathon you've ever run in a 70.3, and not many people would be able to stand there. That you should be really proud of that. That's what you do to make a positive come out of all the negatives that are happening around you. So you walk away with some incentive. Well, I can actually run under in the 115s now. And don't forget when we started, you were battling to break under 120. And that's that's not that long ago, and that's 5 minutes for everybody out there. At that pointy end, 5 minute improvement is massive. And when we get to talk to Roland about he's doing exactly the same thing. So we were talking about 120s early in your career, then we're talking 118s, 117s, then we're trying to break 116s. Now you've already reached the 115s. We are aiming for 113s and 112s. That's where we're going, and that's the thing that you need to grasp onto. You just keep doing what you're doing, and as you progress through the months and the years, those numbers will start to come. And it's already happened for Roland the way he's run with a very hard bike ride, being the hardest bike ride of the day, and ended up with a PB run as well. So it's super exciting.
Take us through it, Roland. You were not your day last year. It was a 1:21.53 half, and then you've run a PB 1:16.42. That's 3:37 pace. A negative split, 3:39 the first half and 3:35 second half. I'll remind everyone that it is not a flat run by any means. There's some pinches in there. You have to go up 4 times. Is it 4 times or 4 times? Yeah. They are serious pinches. They interrupt your speed and flow. They're not super long. I mean, 700 meters, I think, or 800 meters. So. There's definitely climbing there that slows you down. So, Roland, congrats on doing that bike ride and then coming off and running a 1:16.42, your best run ever. How did that feel?
Again, yeah, it felt amazing. I was really happy, to really piece together what was probably, the best race that, I think we've had, ever. And so executing a really good, I'll admit the swim, as we've said for already, but, a really good bike and run together was just fantastic. And, I couldn't be, more stoked with that performance that I put out there on the day. Obviously there was, many things that, contributed to that effort on the day. But I mean, for one, seeing, as Tom said, seeing Tom himself running out there just jogging, I thought he was jogging on the day, and I was shocked to see that he had done that time that he had done at the end, because he did look so comfortable. And I thought he was going to do like a 1:25, and then I looked and he'd just gone and done a 1:16 flat. And he looked so comfortable.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Got another technicality. He's ridiculously comfortable. So it was so motivating to see him out there, doing that, as well as, Matt Phillips and, the remainder of all the Tri-Velo crew. There was a strong contingent out there, getting around each other. So that definitely got me over the line. But as you said, I think, we had just put in some really good, solid training sessions. And of course I've got the hometown advantage, knowing the course intricately. I do the run sometimes, with one of the local running shops, the running company up here. We do that course. They do that course every Tuesday night. So we go and run it. And then I do all the hills around here as well, which is, I think, again, paid dividends in the last few months of training, really getting as much elevation in as, we've talked about it at length in previous episodes, but getting as much elevation in throughout those training sessions, I think really helped with those pinches. And then, finally just, targeting that negative split was really on my mind. Coming out of T2, I had, some absolute hitters coming past me. I think Braden Curry went flying by me, as well as, Jared Osborne, who are, two very strong runners, who must have been doing around, 3:30s straight out of the gate. And I mean, I know I can't run at that level, so it wasn't even in my mind that I was going to even try. I'd like to think that would be in the wheelhouse someday, but at this point in time, as we've said, it's just not there. And so I just sort of immediately locked into, the pace that I had tried and executed in the previous sessions, and something that I knew would be in the ballpark, and then slowly wound it up, and luckily didn't capitulate and held it all together. And so I was just stoked to not, get a cramp or have something go wrong, and, to finally have what felt like a good race, with, a few, missed races in the past. So it was really good.
We have your max heart rate here down as 197 BPM. Is that correct, or is that? It's
probably the watch.
Yeah,
watch.
okay.
And I'll quote Tom, but I think I remember him posting on Strava once, but he said something like either the wristwatch is capping or the heart be flapping, is what he said. So I think it's a spurious result there. I think I wouldn't listen to that.
Didn't have a chest strap on.
No. Next race, endeavour.
Yeah, because there's some gaps here in the bike heart rate data. Which frustrates us, Roland. Please,
extra weight is slowing me down.
Yes.
Extra weight. That's brilliant.
Just that's a note for anyone out there. The chest strap is so much more accurate than the wrist heart rate. And the wrist heart rate can be highly inaccurate. So,
and look, the reason we want that is because of discussions like this between you and your coach. You want to be able to compare how your heart rate is responding, and if you're getting inaccurate data, you can't actually have that conversation. So it is super important to get all the information you can, especially when you're racing and when you're having a look at it post race.
Now, it's not a competition, but your transitions, I will say that you both came out of T2 in exactly 1:10. And T1, Roland, you came out with a whopping 125. Tom back at 146. So if we're going to look at that, 21 seconds there, Tom, where you can improve a little bit.
Yeah, probably should have got my wriggle on a bit more.
Especially when you
socks on there, so that probably slowed me up.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's the 20 seconds probably.
Yes, I was going to say, especially when you two guys have beaten each other by less than 20 seconds in the past, so every little second counts.
Yeah, I've been working on that specific. That's all I've been training, T1 and T2. That's all that matters.
No riding or running, just transition.
Yeah.
They're lightning fast transitions anyway. A lot of people would be keen to hear, to finish off, just your total nutrition intake. So what are you guys having in terms of grams per hour across the race and bike and run specifically? And is it a mix of carbs or drink or gels or food? We'll break it down.
Do you want me to jump in, Roland?
Yes, please.
I'll leave you to figure out something whilst I'm speaking. Yeah, so as usual, so day prior, I do like a carb load, mostly rice-based products of all varieties. And then, yeah, morning of, have a good brekkie a couple of hours before. I'll have a gel, caffeine gel about 45 minutes before the race. And then that's just a smaller, 80 milligram caffeine gel. And then I guess you're stuck into the race. On the bike, I think I had about 240 grams, so about 120 an hour-ish, give or take. That's with, that was one positive. Trialed something slightly different just in the way I made up my nutrition, having my powder sachets with a gel in a bottle. Usually I just have the sachets and then the gels I have separately, but I just mix the gel into the bottle just for less sort of handling. I think that works really well.
How's texture and taste?
No, it was totally fine because once you shake it up with the water, it just seemed like a normal, powdered mixed drink. So it actually worked really well, and it just meant I didn't have to faff around sort of getting my gels out of my bento box and stuff as well. Did have a couple of spare in there in case I lost a bottle or something, but I think that went really well. So about 120 an hour, and then on the run I had similar sort of thing, 2 gels in a soft flask, so 80 grams in a soft flask with water mixed up, and that actually came out quite smoothly as well. So again, saved the faffing around, and then I would have picked up at least a gel and a few cups. So probably had 80 to 90 grams an hour on the run, maybe 100 and 110 grams in total. So it would have been in the 110 to 120 gram an hour range, I would say, across the race, more or less. Yeah.
Phenomenal. That's brilliant thinking and good strategy. That's nice. I haven't heard anyone squeezing the gel into the bottle. So where did you get that from?
I actually don't know. I've seen Sam Long and a few people prepping their bottles on YouTube videos, just squeezing heaps of gels into bottles. Definitely a good way to get a bit more density in there. I also have caffeine in some of those gels as well, whereas I don't in my powder mix. So I thought therefore I could just get it all in one product as opposed to just using another powder sachet, which I guess would get the same amount of carbohydrate, but wouldn't have the caffeine. So yeah, it went really well.
That's brilliant. Roland, you're infamous for your random concoctions of supermarket sugar. So what did you take for the race?
I've got it down to a fine art now, which is great. I'm still copping a bit of flack from all of that because I've had some people messaging me saying, sending me all these nutrition sponsors who, like to advertise what the athletes are having, and then there's me drinking Coke. And anyway, unfortunately, I still am on the sports the soft drink train. I think what I ended up doing was having a gel, just like a caffeinated Mortein gel. Sorry.
Did Ventress?
Yes.
Yeah. That's
lucky
key.
they're not a sponsor yet. Yeah.
Gel before the race, before the swim. Sorry, and then I think straight onto the bike. I just had mixed. I put in some soft drink that has about 10 to 11 grams of carbs per 100 mils into my bottles, of which I had 2, and so it ended up being, and then dissolve some SIS carbohydrate powder into that mixture as well, just to increase the amount of carbohydrates that were in there. And so each bottle ended up being about 140 grams of carbs. And I finished both of those on the bike. So it was then about 140 grams per hour on the bike.
Mm-hmm.
And then coming on to the run, I had another gel coming off the bike onto the run, which I think was about a 40-gram carb gel, and then some more of this special elixir that I've concocted up, which again might have been around 60 grams of carbs. So probably not quite the same numbers as Tom, but certainly, I mean, I certainly didn't feel energy deplete coming into the end. And I think for a half Ironman, you don't maybe need to be quite as aggressive as you do for, a longer effort like an Ironman, which I think is, something that my body's starting to respond better to in the half Ironman distance.
For those listening, those are monster numbers, and you guys are racing at super, super high intensity, a much higher percentage of threshold than a lot of age groupers are, which would contribute to a lot more energy expenditure. So don't just hear this and think, oh, geez, Tom and Roland are doing 120 to 140 an hour. I should try that. Sure, that might be what you need, but just keep that in mind that we have had athletes before, especially with this new craze of all the pros definitely going over 100 grams per hour. Athletes try and jump to that and just get major stomach issues because the jump's too big because they're used to 40 or 60 grams an hour, and that's what they've been used to. So if you are going to try that, maybe build your way up to that. Don't just jump up to over 100 straight away. That's a really important reminder. Well, boys, great episode again. We always seem to go longer than anticipated, but you give us such great insight into your training and racing. What's the next goal race for you both? Tom, what's the redemption race for you?
Yeah, I need something. I've been having a bit of a chat to Jared, and I've had Ironman Western Australia in Busso sort of in the back of my mind, I guess, through that winter build. So that's something that I'm still sort of weighing up. Just going to see how the body responds in the next couple of weeks and try and get back to some consistent training and make sure things are trending in the right direction. If so, I'll look to making sure I can get the adequate arrangements with work to get the couple of days off around that, to make sure I can get across, to make it worth my while going over to Busso. But that's probably the main thing that I've got on my agenda. Just see how the next couple of weeks pan out, really.
How are you feeling, by the way? It's 3 weeks post race. Are you feeling somewhat recovered? Are you still feeling like you're just not quite there? What's the feeling right now? Yeah,
I'm feeling pretty reasonable. Again, like the whole time I felt like pretty much normal doing like endurance training and things. It was just sort of couldn't really push much intensity, particularly on the bike for whatever reason. The run sort of seemed to be able to get away with it a little bit more, even in training prior and things. But I'm feeling pretty good now. Definitely. Yeah, a little bit down in confidence, not so much from the race itself, more just from the fact that it was a new experience for my body just to not respond how I'd expect it to from training and from, being able to sort of adapt and progress from, the training stimulus. But I think that's sort of trending back in the right direction now. So, I'm pretty keen to just get a few consistent weeks under the belt and see things responding appropriately as I'd expect them to have in the past, and then look at what might be the best path forward after that.
Brilliant. Roland, what's on for your calendar year, the rest of your calendar year?
I'm also potentially teeing up a Busso start line list. I'd absolutely love to see Tom towing the line of an Ironman. I think he would be an absolute monster doing that. So I think, Jared, you should really put pressure on him to do it, because I would love to see that. But also considering doing that. But I think the next 2 races that I'm definitely hoping to be doing are a Noosa Tri in November, if I can get a reply back from that team to confirm that I can do it or not. And then following that would be the Harvey Bay 100, which is about 2 weeks after that. Two races in November that I'll be looking to execute a good race for, so that'll be fun. And I know there's some pretty big hitters coming to both of those races, so it'll be pretty fun.
Some final personal questions from you both. The Kona Ironman World Champs are coming up for our female athletes. I know you both love watching the pro athletes and getting any insight into pro athletes on YouTube, as you mentioned before, Tom. can help. Do you have any predictions? Do you have any winners you want to announce? What's your thoughts for the race?
Yeah, gee, I think it's going to be a great race, just like Nice was. Pretty pointy end, or pretty stacked pointy end of the field. I think Lucy's in some pretty ominous form, though. I think she might defend the title. Is my pick.
Roland?
I was actually having this discussion the other day with a few friends of ours, but I think I ended up saying that I think Laura Phillips would probably win, and then Lucy Charles Barclay second, and then Kat Matthews third. That would be my pick, I think.
Great podium pick. We'll see if it pans out like that. Any final thoughts, Coach, on the boys in the episode?
No, super proud of both of them. They're really giving listeners a lot of information about their private and personal feelings, and I think that's a hard thing to do, to be vulnerable and to be opened up with questioning. Jordan, you do a great job at extracting information out of the boys, and just loving the journey. And we're learning so much together. It's fantastic, and can't wait to see what happens from now till the end of the year, and hopefully next year's. We're just continuing to build and improve, and that's what this is all about, and enjoy the process as well. So really happy with the way the boys are going, and there's highs and lows, and we see all the time with the world's best. I keep using Ingebrigtsen as an example. Who would have thought that he would be not even making the final of a 1500 metre race at the world titles, and you just never know what's going to happen next, good and bad. So you just got to keep your chin up and do the best with the situation you find yourself in. So, and the boys are doing a great job at that. So, keep at it, boys. Can't wait to see what the next 3 or 4 months shows us by the time we get to Busso.
I've loved these chats, boys. I've loved the whole year. It's been so great. I look forward to them every time, because it's been such a fun journey to watch from the outside, and you're both being really honest, as we expected from the start, and you give great insight and such great value to the listeners. So thank you for another episode. That's it for this one. Thank you everyone for listening. We hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have, and we'll see you on the next episode.